and welcome to today's program, Free Speech and Civility on College Campuses. I'm Dominique Lukey, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. The topic of free speech on college campuses is being hotly debated at the national, state, and local level. Higher education institutions in our state, including the universities of Wisconsin, are no exception. At a time when many colleges are facing enrollment and funding challenges, they're also experiencing intense interest in global issues like the conflict in the Middle East, as well as national and state issues like the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion on campus. At the heart of these debates is the intersection of free speech and civility. Today's program is moderated by Sam Shinta. We'll hear about the underlying dynamics on college campuses at the national and state level, as well as the actions being taken in Wisconsin. There will be time allotted for questions from the audience too. A big thank you to our program sponsors, Dave and Barb Scogan, Festival Foods, Joe and Pat Heim, Ann Bryce and Bill Haviland, Tom Houlihan, Suzanne Young, and Leader Ethics. Our program hosts are the La Crosse Tribune, the Winona Daily News, the Chippewa Herald, the La Crosse Area League of Women Voters, and Leader Ethics. As always, thank you so much for your continued support. And now I'd like to turn the program over to our moderator, Sam Shinta.
Thank you and good afternoon. Today, we're covering a very important topic, free speech and civility on college campuses, in particular our UW system campuses. I can think of no better person to talk about this topic with us today than Tim Scheel. Tim Scheel is recognized within Wisconsin as a leader in promoting free speech and civility on campus. Now a professor emeritus of philosophy at UW Stout, he founded and directed its Center for Applied Ethics, as well as the civil liberty-focused Menard Center for the Study of Institutions and Innovation. His scholarly work is available in over 1,000 libraries in more than 50 countries on 5 continents. In retirement, he works part-time as the interim director for the newly established Wisconsin Institute for Citizenship and Civil Dialogue and the Menard Center program coordinator. Scheel has been integrally involved in efforts to defend free speech and academic freedom by revising campus speech codes, serving on local and national committees, successfully lobbying for the adoption of the American Association of University Professors Policy on Collegiality, and much more. Please welcome Tim Scheel.
Thank you, Sam. I'm really pleased to be invited to have a conversation with the Leader Ethics group. There's an awful lot going on with this. I've been privileged, I think, to be a part of it in whatever positive way I've been able to over the years. And I'm notorious for going too long, so you might have to wave or yell at me or something if I start to go too long. So let me give a little bit of background to myself to start out. I was raised in a family that valued honest conversations about difficult topics. So I grew up in a family where we talked about the controversies of the day and politics in a mostly civil way. Always some feelings get hurt there once in a while, but it taught me the value of having these conversations and having them in a way where people engage in them in good faith, and it's a constructive and productive enterprise rather than talking past each other or that sort of thing, yelling at each other. So when I got to university, I went to Morehead State University in Minnesota. I was going to become an accountant and discovered that wasn't for me. I became a philosopher. And I learned in those classes the same kind of thing I had learned in my family. We talk about difficult and controversial topics, and we talk about them in ways that are constructive and structured. We don't all end up agreeing. It's not a kumbaya moment for us all, but we all learn, and that's what the educational environment is essentially about. So when I eventually wound up at the University of Wisconsin-Stout in 1992 teaching philosophy courses, I thought it important to carry those conversations on in every aspect of the university I could be involved in. So we did that in my philosophy classrooms. whether that's philosophy of religion, quite controversial stuff, applied ethics courses, business ethics courses, medical ethics courses, all these things involving lots of disagreement. I tried to do that through my work in founding two centers, having a number of public-facing events, trying to bring together, most often, panels of people. I always prefer that to having single speakers, although we did that too, to make sure that a diverse set of views are presented, that people can engage in that kind of honest disagreement and still do so in a way that seems constructive and positive and learning. Now, not every event always turns out the way you hope, that's for sure. One of the trends that started to bother me over the years, though, was in recent years, you started to notice panelists moderating what they were saying or what their viewpoint was in order to make sure there were points of agreement. So the points of disagreement you might have hoped were coming out strongly in the panel discussion were being muted or pushed to the side or not really addressed. And I found that disconcerting. We need to discover what we agree about, but we need to discover and explore what we disagree about just as importantly. I tried to do the same thing in the workshops I ran and the trainings I ran, whether that was in the area of ethics, working with professionals or working with faculty or working with administrators or staff, working with community members, nurses. And the same thing when we started doing the more free expression and civil liberty focused work with the Menard Center. Create an environment where people are going to feel comfortable expressing their honest opinions, feeling free to disagree, feeling the need to explore, taking off the goggles we might usually wear and try to see the world in a little different way. Having a little epistemic humility and realizing none of us are God and we all have more to learn and we can learn from each other even when we disagree. These are the values that were driving my career really all the way through. Even in committees, I chaired a lot of very controversial committees involving the potential termination of faculty members, involving some important and controversial policies the university might or might not adopt. And you tried to create that same environment there. It seems unfortunate, though, that our students are in that kind of environment less and less. And there might be all kinds of reasons we could talk about why that is, but what I hear more and more from students, which I never heard from students when I started doing this in the 80s, is that they don't know how to engage in this kind of conversation. They don't know how to discuss a hot topic without getting hot or without being frustrated and walking away, or they say they need some skills in how to do this. They seem to recognize it's important, although the numbers there aren't as positive as you might hope. And part of it, I think, just stems from a belief that what's the point? People think what they think, what's the point of talking about it? Nobody's going to change their mind. So why do it? Lots of obstacles to these conversations. So as a result of my work over the years at Stout and in other places, I eventually became a principal investigator for a survey that went to the UW campuses. That survey had some interesting and mixed results. Some of the results looked fairly positive. Some of the results did not look so positive. And connected to that survey, the universities of Wisconsin developed a set of initiatives. One of those initiatives was to begin this institute, Wisconsin Institute for Citizenship and Civil Dialogue, whose mission would be to try to protect and promote free expression, academic freedom, and civil dialogue across the universities, focused on the universities, but not excluding working with the community. It's taken us a while to get this really launched for a variety of reasons. We are now fully launched. I started work in November as an interim director on a part-time basis. And we're ready to launch our first couple of things. And we'll be launching a series of other things later this spring and next fall. So one of the things we're pretty excited about is the opportunity to provide the universities with grant monies to do 4 different kinds of work. So one of the areas we'll be accepting proposals on is research. It could be any different sort of research in the areas involved. It could be theoretical research. It could be some applied research. We're most interested in funding any kind of proposal that looks like it's going to be applied in a way to improve campus culture. So we'll be especially interested in research proposals that can be turned into some sort of constructive activity. We'll also be taking proposals involving curriculum development and professional development. I've met many faculty over the years who have an interest in these areas, but don't discuss them in their class because they don't feel they're qualified or trained well enough to do so. So we'll be able to help those folks out, both in their teaching and in their scholarly and public-facing activities. We'll be funding and organizing various events and activities. Some of those will be public-facing, some will be more closed-door types of things, retreat types of things. We'll be looking to fund assessment projects. Maybe a department wants to assess their classroom environments. Maybe they want to provide some assessment across a college or a school. We don't have a lot of empirical data. More empirical data would be better. And it's a moving needle. So what the data told us 10 years ago or 5 years ago isn't necessarily what the data is going to tell us next fall or what the data is going to tell us in a few years. So we need to sort of set a baseline of empirical information and then come back to that and look on whether the needle seems to be moving in any direction. We'll also be offering workshops and trainings for both free expression, academic freedom, and civil dialogue. Those trainings would be available primarily to campus audiences, but not exclusively to them. We're especially focused on students and giving them the training they need. I've been doing free expression, academic freedom workshops with students for a number of years, and we've found a format that works really nicely. It's a 2-hour format. I come in and spend maybe 20 minutes with a little setup. They do a little reading before the thing, and we spend a little over an hour and a half with them just looking at different real-life cases that have come up in Wisconsin universities and trying to analyze, what the situation is. Is this protected expression? Is it unprotected expression? How should the university respond? How should students respond? All the different facets that might go into that. Those have proven to be really effective. Even students who come in with some prior knowledge discover a lot more. And a lot of students just know very little about what's protected and unprotected expression. Perhaps there was a day where students came out of high school and had a better understanding of that. I don't know, but it seems pretty clear today students coming out of high school don't really have a good understanding of protected and unprotected expression. So that becomes our job. The last thing I'll mention here right now is a lot of what we'll be doing is just providing resources. I mean, we're not starting from scratch here. There's universities and faculty and staff, administrators on campuses that are already doing some of this work. So part of what we need to do is figure out who are those people, build relationships with them, and then try to provide them with extra resources to expand their work, spread their work, share their work. There's a lot of organizations interested in this intersection. I think a lot of people, when they first think about free expression and civility, think they're in conflict. And it sometimes seems as if they're in some kind of just interminable conflict. Like, how can the two ever work together? Free expression doesn't require civility, and there's a lot of incivility going along, and it's protected by free expression. So how do you bring those two things together? It's an important question and not at all an easy question. My personal view is that free expression and civil dialogue work best when they work together, and work less well when they're working at odds. And so that's a lot of what WICED's work will be. How can we use civil dialogue to increase expression? How can we use civil dialogue to improve expression? How can we use civil dialogue to move the needle on campuses, to be more open to opposing views, to be more open to just listening, to being more open to sharing an honest disagreement? All these important things. We also don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of resources out there from a lot of different organizations. I work in doing this job very closely with Eric Giordano. Eric Giordano is the executive director of the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service. So we joke a lot about working together with wicked whips. And I've gotten in the habit of saying, well, wicked in the best possible way. Eric is really the civil dialogue, civil discourse expert. I'm more the free expression, academic freedom expert. So we make a really good team in doing this work. And we're very excited. We're very hopeful. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of conversations we need to have to find out what's going on in campuses, with student affairs folks, what kind of trainings are being done, and really how can we help? What can we do to move the needle in the right direction? That's probably a good place for me to stop.
Excellent, Tim. Well, thank you so much for that overview, and let's maybe dive a little deeper into some of these topics. One of the things that I really appreciate about this program is it seems to be integrally tied with the Wisconsin idea, this whole idea of taking the classroom beyond the classroom and into the state. And this idea of empowering students to be better citizens in the process. Along those lines, you mentioned the kids coming in from high school. I certainly see that in my classes as well, with the deficiency in knowledge on some of these basics. Has there been any discussion of perhaps making some sort of civics work mandatory on the campuses as kind of an introductory class that every student has to take? Because right now, as you know, like gen ed classes, they're supposed to take stuff that touches on that, but they can really get through college without having to take anything that integrally relates to this stuff. So has there been any discussion on something like that?
That's not so much in the WICED's conversations right now. I mean, there certainly are people who would like stronger civics education, both in K through 12 and in higher ed. That hasn't really become a key factor for us. The way it is important for us really is, I think we all think, Eric, I should mention John Blakeman, who's a professor of political science at Stevens Point, is a third person that's helping launch WICED here. I think all of us are in agreement that it's important to put civil dialogue and free expression and academic freedom in that larger context of citizenship and civics. So that's going to be part of what we do, but it's not the core. I won't be surprised if there is a stronger push for civics education in the universities of Wisconsin, but I think that's coming a little bit later.
Okay. Excellent, and good to know that's because I guess my concern, and we've seen this in the free speech workshops, right, is that when you create the opt-in model, you get some student participation, but not much student participation. And one of the comments that even came up before this session, someone raised the point about looking at the survey and noting that a relatively small amount of students across the campuses responded. So there's this, this kind of tension between a need for higher citizenship and engagement by our students and understanding of the importance of civil dialogue, but then whether students actually are going to want to engage with this.
Well,
so what can we do? What can we do about that? I mean, I know that's the $64,000 question, right?
Yeah. Well, I just a little quick clarification on the survey. Over 11,000 students responding is a pretty good response rate, especially for an online survey. And the demographics of the group of students that responded really closely matches the demographic group characteristics of their campuses. So, although we would have loved a bigger sample, it's a very representative sample of the student bodies of the campuses. I think the route to go is as many people as possible in every position possible. Encourage these conversations. Offer opportunities for these conversations. Maybe I'm a chemistry professor, and a lot of these conversations aren't what's going to happen in my classroom. That doesn't mean I can't be involved in this in other ways. There's lots of other ways you can be involved in these activities. I know our student affairs folks have tried to have these conversations with students, but part of the challenge is there's just so many things the universities have to do and cover now. So you kind of have to make the case that this should have some level of priority and become part of the routine. And I think there's work to be done there. That there be, universities have strategic plans for everything under the sun, but they don't have a strategic plan for how they're going to promote and protect free expression, academic freedom, and civil dialogue. So one of my personal goals would be to encourage campuses to develop a strategic plan. What's the plan to develop these values, to appreciate these values, to live these values from the time they matriculate to the time they graduate? It isn't just in the air. It isn't just going to happen by magic. It's going to happen because we make a dedicated effort to make it happen.
Well, I love that example you use of the chemistry professor, right? Because what I think so many people miss in this conversation is this idea that this is all about politics, right? And so if you bring politics into the chemistry classroom, you're obviously doing something wrong, because that doesn't belong in the chemistry classroom necessarily. But at the same time, you want that chemistry professor to be able to spark that critical thinking and that civil dialogue. And so maybe part of this is as simple as, creating a permission structure of sorts and an education structure of sorts for the faculty to say, well, yeah, you don't have to talk about politics, but in your chemistry class, you could talk about pharmaceutical patents, right? You talk about something that is germane to the topic at hand, but also can generate that conversation where people have to agree and disagree and have that clash of ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we usually think of censorship as pertaining to political topics, as you say, but censorship and self-censorship have become quite prevalent even in the hard sciences. When you look at some of the decisions editors of journals are making, or what some of the stances of professional societies have been, the idea that we should be a big tent and all support open inquiry is strongly challenged even in the hard sciences. So, again, it isn't necessarily something you're going to bring up in your, chemistry 101 class, but maybe these are things you bring about in your senior level seminar when you're talking about going into this field and becoming a chemical engineer or whatever else you might do, these things are going to happen to you, and you need to understand them and prepare for them, and become a supporter of these values. Now, obviously, the corporate world is a little bit different than the government or academic world, but these are values that need to apply, at least to some extent, even in the corporate world.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and you're absolutely right about the imperative. I had a situation last semester. I was teaching an upper level class, a seminar style, 25 students, and I drove from a gen ed group, so some poli-sci students, but a lot of students from a variety of disciplines. And I had asked at some point in the semester about conversation and dialogue in the classroom. And to my shock, the vast majority of the students who were juniors and seniors hadn't experienced a class that was interactive in terms of having conversation to that point before this particular class. And so, again, anything we can do to spark that seems like that's going to create better opportunities for students to explore some of these ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. In these workshops, we have students fill out evaluation sheets, and one of the most frequent and consistent comments is, "This was awesome. We never get a chance to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Do more of these. Do more of these." And obviously, these are students who are self-selecting into these environments.
Sure.
There's a little bit of bias to the feedback that we're getting from these folks. They're hungry for these conversations. And really, it's a challenge, for a lot of faculty. There's so many things you have to cover in the class, and it's just going to take some work. And working with the teaching and learning centers on the campuses, how can we work with you to provide the resources to the instructors that spend time with you? Are there groups that would want to read a book? Are there groups who would want to work on a curricular project? Are there, what can we do to work with you to help do your job? So, we're as much as possible trying to be open to ideas, being open to feedback, being open to what the needs are, rather than saying, well, let's see, the three of us sat down and we thought this is where it should go. Now we're coming to you and we're going to say, this is what you should be doing. There might have to be at least a little bit of that from a system perspective, but to the greatest extent possible, we want to be as transparent with what we're doing and open and receptive to people's feedback and ideas as possible, and shape what we do in the way that can help people do their jobs best at the universities.
Now, how do you do this? And this is building on one of the questions that has been posed on the chat. How do you do this in a political environment where the feeling is that professors are indoctrinating students? And we're seeing this obviously from all sides. So how do you navigate that, or work with the teachers to push back on some of this stuff?
That's a great question. I don't think anybody's got an easier, pat, or mechanical answer for that.
Yep.
But
that's why I ask the hard questions.
Yeah, yes. Part of the answer is, when we have panels and we select different people to be on the panel, you might be surprised at how often the issue doesn't become Democrat versus Republican. It's an issue they agree about, and there's something else that they disagree about that we can then get into. A lot of topics aren't partisan. So, in my view, at least, the topic of free expression isn't a partisan topic. Now, there are certain topics within free expression that become partisan, but the need for and the value of free expression isn't just a concern of one or the other party. They both need it. And the same with, say, academic freedom on a college campus. Academic freedom isn't for the political scientists and not for the business management professors. It has to apply across the board. It's not really a political concept in its basic core. Now, again, there are certain specific topics within academic freedom that do become partisan, and that's certainly true. But again, the need for, the value of academic freedom isn't really a partisan issue.
Yeah. Now back to the speech survey a little bit. You obviously helped design. You're well versed on the survey and the survey response. I think most folks, maybe read a newspaper article about the survey. Could you maybe go tell us a little bit more about the results? Particularly, you highlighted that there were some very positive and there were some very negative things that came out of the survey. Maybe highlight a few of the positives and a few of the negatives, and then maybe talk a little bit about what Wicked is doing in particular to address some of the negatives, or how it maybe spurred some of the proposed changes.
So, on the positive side, a majority of students reported their professors encouraged discussion in the classroom. On the downside of that, students were not as willing to engage in the discussion. And the main reason being their fear of what their peers might say or do as a result of their sharing their honest opinion. So the problems weren't primarily with what faculty were doing. It wasn't primarily a perception that faculty were indoctrinating people. It was more the impression of, I'm afraid this person won't talk to me in the dorm if I say this, or I'm afraid, nobody will want to hang out with me. The self-censorship was driven primarily by peer pressure. Now, you have to add to that, there was a higher than you would ever want number of students who reported pressure from faculty to agree with a certain position being discussed in the class. And that was pretty lopsided. It was pretty lopsided, where conservatives were feeling the pressure and liberals, especially the more liberal students, were not. Interestingly, another one of the items indicated that liberal students know that. They know that they're freer to talk in the classroom than the conservative students. People aren't unaware of all of this. Students see it as well as other people. So, I mean, the positive part of this Wicked wants to work on is with faculty having those conversations, making sure it's clear all viewpoints are welcome. Make your argument, bring your evidence. That's what this is about. Now, maybe I've got nothing to back up my view, and that gets pointed out in class, and then I feel bad, or then I don't want to talk for a while. Well, that's part of the learning process, right? So the goal is don't make people feel like dummies when their argument isn't very strong. The goal is help them figure out a stronger argument, or help them figure out how to adapt their view to a view that more closely fits the evidence. So, I mean, the most discouraging part of the survey is the unsurprising evidence that conservative students don't have the same experience on campus as liberal students. And, how do you change that? Things didn't get this way overnight. It's occurred over a long period of time, and we're not going to get over this overnight. It's going to take a long period of time. And all you can do, people respond to incentives, right? So we have to think about what are the incentives to get administrators, staff, and faculty behind this project of free expression and civil dialogue? And what are the incentives we can provide students to get on board with this project to move the needle?
Yeah, I love, again, that you highlighted this idea of hitting on this notion that in college, you're going to be exposed to lots of different ideas, and you're going to be exposed to challenging ideas, and it's all about learning to be the critical thinker and defending yourself. As one of my friends at Viterbo University points out, the classroom should be a dangerous place, not because you're in physical danger, but because you're in intellectual challenge danger. Is part of this perhaps that we have to do a better job of telling students and their parents when they come to college that is what happens in college, that you are coming coming to a place where you are going to be perhaps challenged for the first time in your life, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Universities are marketed more and more and more as a place you go to get credentialed, to get to the place you want to be in a career. And that's certainly an important part of what universities do. But I think it's become stressed to a degree that takes away the other part. Really, the core mission of the university to me is the search for truth, finding the truth, disseminating the truth, exploring the truth, debating the truth. It doesn't matter what field you're in. There isn't any field where there aren't controversies. There's controversies in math. You aren't going to run into them in your calculus class, but they're there. If that's the field you're going into, they're there. So all these folks, and I'm a little frustrated that in a way, if this is being focused on in higher ed and it's not happening in K through 12, well, there's an awful lot of students, awful lot of people who don't go into higher ed. There's a lot of people who go into higher ed and leave without getting degrees. But a lot of this is stuff we want everyone, all citizens, to have some understanding and appreciation for. So, I don't know how Wicked can reach everyone, but I think that's the ultimate goal is, Wicked will have to start where it starts. But how can we grow and expand that mission to impact more and more people and not a very restricted audience?
And I think you hit it right on the head there. And that I think this is again where the Wisconsin idea comes in, right? That if we're breeding better citizens through the university system, that in turn should turn outward to the rest of the state and kind of enhance the civil dialogue throughout.
Yeah. I mean, I do have to acknowledge one of the big challenges that we face, and that's the challenge of assessment. I mean, higher ed has a lot of assessment difficulties. When I teach my class, I get my student evaluations. I can have peers come in and watch my classroom. But what students took away from that they are using a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, unless I run into that student and they talk to me, there's no way for me to know. So, what the long-term impact of a lot of this is very difficult to assess. And the short term is hard to assess too. So one of the things I'm interested in is talking to some assessment experts and seeing if we can't come up with some better ways and more extensive ways to assess what we're doing, what needs improvement, what's working well. Too often we just rely on, our anecdotes or our own personal experience, and that has some value, but it also has a very limited value.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, dealing with, when you're trying to deal with things like civil dialogue, assessing whether more civil dialogue is happening or not it's one of those things where you almost have to take it on faith that creating the environment for better civil dialogue will lead to better citizenship and lead to better civil dialogue, but you're never going to be able to prove it, right? Or you're only going to see it in ways that may or may not have directly been impacted by what you're doing.
Yeah. And I mean, in my view, to be honest, there's a lot of incentives for people to be uncivil. Being uncivil is what gets you attention. Being uncivil is what gets you clicks and likes. In a social media world, being outrageous is what gets you fame and attention. And unless we can have more role models for students and we create environments where they take what we're teaching them out of the classroom or the workshop and they apply it in their own daily life, that's the real test. Are they taking this stuff away and actually using it?
So you're talking today to a group of citizens who are obviously passionate about ethical leadership and good citizenship in our communities here in Wisconsin and beyond. what can we do as leaders in our community, as citizens in our community, to support the work that you're doing?
Oh, so many things. Oh, so many things.
Please put us to work.
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, Eric Giordano is really the civil dialogue expert amongst the two of us. And through WIPS, he already does, some of this kind of work, especially with community groups. Some of you probably have already worked with Eric on a project through WIPS. If you haven't, check out WIPS. There might be something you do want to do with him. So one of the things we need to know with an audience like this, as with the campuses, is what do you want? What do you need? Tell us. If we can't provide it, we'll try to go and find somebody who can. I mean, we can make our guesses based on our experiences and the people we talk about, but there's nothing like hearing it from the people themselves and the organizations themselves. So, there's a lot of state organizations. You're more familiar with them than I am, but the League of Municipalities, Wisconsin Newspaper Association, Broadcasters Association, there's a county association. These are all folks we'd like to build relationships with and try to figure out what their concerns are, what their needs are, and how if we might be able to help if we can. I mean, we don't have tons of time and money to help, but we have the willingness and the interest. And it might be that we're not the ones who provide the service you want, but we can connect you to somebody who can. The other thing is, just funding. We're operating on a $250,000 budget this year, likely a $500,000 budget next year. That doesn't go very far when you're talking about dealing with 160,000 students in a system and 40,000 employees. It's a nice place to start. It's not where you want to end up. It's a place to start. So we'll have to be exploring other ways to generate income. Is that through donations, philanthropic gifts? Is that through, fee for services? There might be a number of different ways we can build our financial resources to provide greater services and products, so to speak, to people who have those needs. So I invite all of you. If you have an interest in what Wicked's trying to do, if you have a need you think that we can serve, I would love to hear from you. I can't make any promises. But we would love to hear from you and explore what we might be able to do together.
Excellent. Just a reminder to everybody, I think I've been addressing many of the questions already or integrating them into my questions, but please keep posting questions here. And thank you for that as a resource. Is it beneficial for us to, also in our communities, many of us are here in La Crosse, you're going to use the word pressure, but contact our college administrators and impart to them the importance of what you're doing and why they need to be engaging with Wicked?
Well, so you put me in a hard spot, Sam.
Sorry.
If I say yes and you all start calling the college administrators,
Yeah.
they're going to come after me.
Being productively engaging, I guess, is the thing. Not just wearing down phone lines.
And I absolutely. I mean, everybody's just so busy, and there's so many mandates and requirements that have to be met. And it's true whether you're a faculty member or administrator or a staff person or a student. So unless people are calling attention to something, unless people are encouraging something, it's really easy for that to just slip by the side in view of other pressing needs. So, to whatever extent I've been successful in my career in moving any of this forward, it's because I was a bit of a gadfly. I raised conversations people didn't necessarily wanted to have and tried to show them it was important to have it and that we do something. And so I can hardly blame other people if they wish to do the same thing.
So you talked earlier about students self-censoring. Are we seeing that with faculty as well? That faculty are also self-censoring, or have you heard about that, experienced that?
Yeah, there's been a number of studies done, both in the United States and the UK, Australia, New Zealand, other English-speaking countries, that show faculty are self-censoring, and again, primarily but not exclusively faculty who are on the right side of the aisle, so to speak, conservative or libertarian faculty. We have not done data collection on that in the UW system yet. There's a conversation that we should do a survey like that through Wicked sooner rather than later. And again, part of the idea is just we're all operating from anecdotes and personal stories, and we don't have any evidence beyond that. So every survey having some limitations and being imperfect provides something more, something better, but it's never the end of the story. It's just another piece of data. So I think we want to know the answer to that. Get some data.
So an organization you and I both have great admiration for it. Someone was asking earlier about organizations that work in this field. Perhaps the best is FIRE, founded thefire.org, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, which used to focus primarily on college campuses, has broadened their mission. They rate college campuses based on free expression and free speech. How are the UW institutions doing vis-a-vis FIRE, the big watchdogs on this issue, and what could we be doing better?
I haven't looked really closely at that, but to the extent I have looked at it, they only rate a fairly small number of universities. They rate something like 250, something just over that, if I recall right. So I think in their last report, there were only 3 universities of Wisconsin institutions that were rated. Madison was rated, Eau Claire was rated, and I think UW Milwaukee was the 3rd one. I probably shouldn't say too much more than that. None of them rated especially high on the list or especially low on the list.
Okay.
They were all, as I recall, somewhere in the middle. One of the things, FIRE's ratings can get very complicated. They involve a number of different factors and weightings. And some of those are controversial, how they weight certain things. And the way they code certain things can sometimes be controversial. A lot of it is based on student responses, and the way they collect those student responses can get complicated too. So I think FIRE's ratings are a place to start a conversation, but I think FIRE's ratings can't be taken as, literal truths. They're trying to quantify things that are very hard to quantify. I think one of the things they do that's more valuable is when they look at university policies and code them red, yellow, or green. I think that's a pretty strong indicator that they have. But the problem with that one is, of course, the university might have a green light policy, that is, it meets every constitutional requirement and expectation, but they might not enforce it well. They might enforce it badly. And the same with the campus, they might have yellow or red light policies. The policy might not be good on its face, but they might be enforcing it in ways that are constitutionally appropriate and strong. So it can be a messy thing. I have great admiration for fire. I've worked with fire for 20 years on a lot of different projects, but they're working in an area that's difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's maybe pull it back to your expertise. What do you see, again, with your experience and with the work that you've done? What do you see as the biggest free expression challenge at our Wisconsin universities right now?
Wow. I guess the one that I have the most hope for doing something about is turning the tide on student self-censorship. I think we can accomplish something there in a relatively short amount of time, but assuming we can get administrators, faculty on board. They're in a position to start to change those impressions. They're in a position to create an environment where students fear each other less. They can build a sense of community in a classroom so that the person you sit next to and have a disagreement with isn't going to scorn you outside of the classroom. That's challenging to do. It's challenging to build community in a classroom. A lot of people teach classes with 40, 50, 60, 80, 100 students in them. How you create that kind of community or create those kinds of discussions in classes of that size is very difficult. I once taught a 250 person introductory ethics class, the Phil Donaldson way. I went around with my microphone and talked to students in this gigantic audience. But so I think we can't just give up and say, I can't do it, with this number of students. I think everybody needs to think of how can I at least make some into creating a sense of community. We're all Blue Devils. Let's talk about what it means to be a Blue Devil. Let's talk about how having an open mind, being willing to engage differences. Let's talk about the importance of looking for the truth, exploring the truth. Let's talk about how that's important to being a Blue Devil, and not just going to the hockey game or the football game, or it's not just getting credentialed in my field, but it's being this kind of person, being this kind of citizen, having these shared values that are core to the American democracy.
Well, and it looks like we've got some reason for hope here in La Crosse. It looks like UWL is holding a couple of sessions this spring geared towards civil discourse, where it's a mix of staff and students working together to, build a space for conversation. Is this the sort of group that should get in touch with Wicked? That as they're embarking on this new journey to let you know what they're doing and make sure that they're getting best practices advice from you?
Absolutely. I think I said earlier, we're not starting from scratch. There are people doing this work. There are people who weren't doing it a couple of years ago who are starting to do it now. We would like to know who's doing what's working, what's not working, and how we can help.
And obviously it's a tough time for speech on campus, but I can't remember the last time it wasn't a tough time for speech on campus. It just seems that we hear about things at different points a little bit more broadly. But in hearing you, it sounds like you've got reason for hope here, that you think we can and maybe will get better. Is that true? You're hopeful?
Yeah. No, a colleague once said, Tim, you're not an optimist or a pessimist, you're a hopist. Yeah, I guess I sort of am. It's like I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how things are going to go, but I do have hope. I meet a lot of people who, whatever their personal political or ideological views are, recognize a problem, would like things to be better, are willing to engage in good faith efforts to try to make a difference. And, unfortunately, there's the other side that engages in all of this in bad faith. They're not really trying to make a difference in a positive way. They're just trying to score points or please a certain audience or something like that. So, We really need to figure out who wants to be part of a coalition in the state of Wisconsin to drive this stuff forward. Wicked can't do this stuff alone. We're going to be one small part of it, but maybe we can be the place that brings people together. Maybe we can be the place that helps coordinate, helps people collaborate, helps share the resources, helps provide the resources, so that 1,000 points of light can shine here in Wisconsin.
Outstanding. Well, Tim, thank you so much for giving us an overview of Wicked, of your work, of the free speech issues and the challenges and the opportunities here in Wisconsin. We really appreciate it. And also thank you for letting us know how we can all help. I know that there are a bunch of people on this call that want to throw their shoulder into this issue. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Well, thanks to you and Leader Ethics for the invitation. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I really look forward to hearing from many of you in the days to come and how we can move forward in this work.
Outstanding. Well, as always, I'm going to turn it over to Lee Rash to take us out.
Well, thank you, Tim and Sam, for an outstanding conversation and informal, informative, and engaging discussion on this important issue. And I want to thank our audience for being a part of today's program as well. We have some very important things happening in this election year. And so I encourage you to stay tuned to some of the things that are on the near horizon for Leader Ethics. Our next event will be a virtual program, and we will introduce and hear from the 2024 Leader Ethics Award recipient. We'll also be going through in more detailed discussions the activities that we have that we're working on in this 2024 election year. I also want to share, I always wanted to do this. I can say we have breaking news. Leader Ethics has been supporting the work of an organization called American Promise to pass a constitutional amendment to permit the regulation of campaign finance. And I have to admit, when we first got involved with this partnership a couple of years ago, we thought this was going to be quite a long shot. Well, there's actually there's things that are happening right now in Madison, and the state Senate is considering putting a joint resolution on the floor for a vote within the next week or so. If this were to pass and be signed, we essentially would be the 23rd state endorsing campaign finance reform in the form of a constitutional amendment. That would be a very important, significant first step in the process. Certainly good news for Wisconsin. So I encourage you to stay tuned to our website, and we'll keep all of our members and contacts informed as this moves forward as well. Again, thank you for being part of today's program, and please have a great day. Thank you.